Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Scarv Show. We are live in Salt Lake City. I am your host, Andrew Scarborough, and for this episode, we are going to discuss what I believe each record will be for the NFL as the NFL season is just upon us. It is less than 3 weeks away. So, in this episode, I will be doing my own opinions on what I think teams' final records will be for the year. So, wherever you may be, sit back, relax, and let's get into this podcast, baby. Let's go. All right, everybody. Welcome to my podcast, and let's get right into this. The current date today is August 21st, 2023. So we will be doing our predictions and records for the 2023-2024 NFL season. So let's get right into it. Let's go. And we're going to start with the AFC, and specifically, we're going to start in the AFC East. So, for my AFC East predictions, I have the Buffalo Bills finishing 13-4 for their final record of the 2023-24 season, and I believe this is the best team in the AFC East. Um, they do have their bright spots. Josh Allen is one of the top quarterbacks in the league. Obviously, he made the Madden 24 cover, so that kind of proves it a little bit. But, I mean, this team has just been destined to win a Super Bowl over the last couple of years, and I think they're going to have one of their best years yet, finishing at 13-4 for their final record. All right, and then in second place in the AFC East, the New York Jets will finish 11-6 for their record. I believe Aaron Rodgers is going to make a big impact for this team this year, but I don't think they're going to be totally elite as everybody thought they would be. But he's definitely going to turn them around. Obviously, the defense is great. The Jets defense. They have weapons now. They have Mecole Hardman and Garrett Wilson on the offensive side with Aaron Rodgers, and now they just added Dalvin Cook last week. So the offense is going to be explosive. And then you also have Sauce Gardner and that C.J. Mosley defense right behind them. So it's going to be a good team for sure this year for the New York Jets. But I have them finishing at 11-6. All right, and then in third place, I have the Miami Dolphins in the AFC East finishing 9-8 for their final record this year. I'm still not sold on the Tua project. I think Tua's not a terrible quarterback, but he's not a great one. I think he's overhyped. But that Dolphin offense got loaded up. They got Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill. They got Robbie Anderson from the Cardinals. Their running backs, Raheem Mostert, Jeff Wilson on that side. Their offensive line is supposed to be really good. So definitely Tua is going to have some weapons around him. And then, of course, they also did build up their defense, bringing in cornerback Jalen Ramsey, who, though, will be sidelined with injury till about December. So he's pretty much gone for the year. So that's a major hit. But they also have Jerome Baker, Xavier Howard on that defensive side. So they still got a good defense led by former Denver Broncos coach Vic Fangio. He is their new defensive coordinator this year, one of the specialists in defense. So I got the Dolphins kind of being average, but they're going to finish 9-8 in the AFC East and will be taking third place. And then taking last place in the AFC East will be the New England Patriots. They will be finishing at 7-10. Their final record will be. And the Patriots are just not really a great team. I mean, they got a good defense. Bill Belichick is a great coach, great defensive-minded coach. So the defense will stack up. But Mac Jones is another quarterback I'm not sold on. I think he's just average, They brought in Juju Smith-Schuster with Devontae Parker. They brought in Zeke Elliott. But Zeke Elliott, I'm not sure. He's had some unproductive years over the last couple of years. I mean, maybe that changes in New England. But this will be an average team. They will finish at 7-10. Don't see really much hope for the New England Patriots this year. All right, now we are going to move on to the AFC West division, where my Denver Broncos are in this division, and I will get into what their record is first. Well, not first, but I'll get into it into a minute. But in the AFC West, I have taking first place in the AFC West this year will be the Kansas City Chiefs. They will be finishing at a record of 12-5, And the Patty Mahomes effect. As long as he's in KC, they're going to dominate. They're probably going to dominate that AFC West division. It doesn't matter what kind of team Patrick Mahomes has around him; he will just be Patty Mahomes that everyone knows about, and he will carry his team to a potential Super Bowl berth every single year. So I got the Chiefs finishing number one in the AFC West at a record of 12-5. All right, and then number two, finishing second place in the AFC West, I have the Denver Broncos. Yes, my Denver Broncos, finishing at a record of 11-6. The Sean Payton effect is real. Sean Payton's going to turn this team around. That obviously he brought in a bunch of weapons for Russell Wilson this year. I think Russell Wilson will be a changed quarterback this year. They won't be on the totally elite level, but they will have a decent record to fight for in the playoffs. And Russell Wilson's going to turn it around. Obviously, he's recovering from injury. He has weapons around him. They brought in Marquez Callaway, Marvin Mims, in free agency and in the draft. Unfortunately, they did lose Tim Patrick and KJ Hamler, but KJ Hamler is expected to be with the Broncos back soon, so there's some speed on top of that. Of course, you have Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy on that side. You have the tight ends Albert O and Greg Dulcich, and then you have the star running back who I think is just made for a breakout year this year in Javonte Williams, my guy number 33. They rebuilt the offensive line, bringing in Mike McGlinchey and Ben Powers, and bringing in some veteran linemen to help Russell Wilson be who he is. And then, of course, that defense is still the number one defense from last year. They brought back everybody in Kareem Jackson. Justin Simmons will be there. You have Josie Jewell, Alex Singleton, who they brought back this year. They brought in Frank Clark from the Kansas City Chiefs, as well as Randy Gregory, who we brought in last year, who is now fully recovered. So the Denver Broncos will be an 11-16, but they will unfortunately finish second in the AFC West. And then moving on to the third spot, the Los Angeles Chargers will be taking third in the AFC West, and they will be finishing with a record of 10-7. I like the Chargers. I like Justin Herbert. I like Eckler. I think they got some good weapons on that offense. Obviously, you have Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and who they brought in, Quentin Johnson. But I just don't trust the coach, man, and his decisions. I can't trust for them to stay healthy all year. I mean, that's the bad thing about the Chargers is they have great teams every year, but they always end up getting hurt, as you saw with Joey Bosa last year. They do have Khalil Mack out there. They have Derwin James. They brought in Eric Kendricks from the Minnesota Vikings, so it's still going to be a good defense. But I give them a 10-7 record because I just don't trust the coach, and I think that defense needs to stay healthy this year, and even on the offensive side as well, with Mike Williams having a couple injuries over the years. But I have the Los Angeles Chargers finishing West in the third in the AFC West at a record of 10-7. And then finishing fourth and last place in the AFC West, I have the Las Vegas Raiders going 7-10 for their record. They will be finishing last in the AFC West. I like Jimmy G as a quarterback. I think he's a great quarterback. I just think this is a really bad Raider team. Josh McDaniels, I'm sorry, is just not really a head coach. He kind of showed it last year that the Raiders aren't as good as they're supposed to be. Of course, the years in Denver, he had horrible years in Denver as a head coach. I think Josh McDaniels is a better coordinator. And then that defense has some questions on the other side. I mean, the offense is great, but they did lose Darren Waller, who they traded to the New York Giants this past offseason. So that took a hit for sure. But they did bring in cornerback Marcus Peters from the Baltimore Ravens. So that's a bright spot for that defense. But I just don't trust the Raiders. I think Devontae Adams and Jimmy G will be limited this year, and not really much going on in Las Vegas. So I have the Raiders finishing at a 7-10 record, taking last in the AFC West. All right, everybody. Now we are going to move into the AFC South division, where we have the Jaguars, Titans, Texans, and Colts. And for my first place team taking first in the AFC South this year will, of course, be the Jacksonville Jaguars. They will be finishing at a record of 10-7 and taking first in the AFC South. Trevor Lawrence is a beast. I mean, he's the future of Jacksonville. They brought up that team. They built that team around the draft with Travis Etienne, bringing in wide receivers such as Christian Kirk, Of course, on the defensive side, they have Devin Lloyd from the Utah Utes, Chad Muma also from Wyoming in the linebacker positions. Not to also mention having Josh Allen, the linebacker who they drafted a couple years ago, who is a absolute superstar for Jacksonville. And then you also have Andre Sisco at the safety position, who they drafted. So they really built this team through the draft over the years, and I think head coach Doug Marrone is going to steer them in the right direction. They're not going to be an elite team, but they will be a good team. Obviously, they made the playoffs last year and did some damage, almost beating the Chiefs um, in the AFC divisional game. But the Jaguars will ultimately finish first place in the AFC South, as this really isn't a great division this year. But we are going to move on to that in a second here. But yeah, finishing in first place, the Jacksonville Jaguars at a 10-7 record. Finishing second place in the AFC South will be the Tennessee Titans, and I have them finishing at a record of 8-9. The Tennessee Titans are going to be an okay team. They're going to be a 500 team this year. I understand they brought in DeAndre Hopkins. They kept Derrick Henry, but they did lose a lot of other pieces, especially on that defensive side of the ball. And then just over the years, the decisions to trade A.J. Brown to the Philadelphia Eagles. Mike Vrabel is another head coach who's kind of just more of a coordinator. I mean, he's a great coach. He's gotten in the playoffs a couple of years, but we're still not sure how really good Tannehill is this year. Obviously, their backups are Malik Willis and Will Levis that they drafted in back-to-back years. So obviously, Ryan Tannehill's probably on his way out soon. But if they don't perform well, then the Tennessee Titans might look in a different direction. But I just don't think the Tennessee Titans are really that great of a team. They will be a 500 team this year, and that's just the story for the Tennessee Titans. But they will be finishing second in the AFC South. All right, and then finishing third in the AFC South, I have the Houston Texans with a finishing record of 6-11. And don't get me wrong, D'Amico Ryans is a great coach. It's going to be a bad first year for him because this is just a very young team. They have a new rookie quarterback in C.J. Stroud, who they drafted this year. But they did build up that defense, bringing in Will Anderson from the draft, Shaquille Griffin from free agency, Jalen Petrie. Um, they have a lot of solid defensive players on that end, on that defensive side, but I just think it's not a great team overall. Their wide receivers are all right. I mean, their best wide receiver is Robert Woods. And then they also did bring in Dalton Schultz from the Cowboys, who I think is a great tight end. But I just see this team not finishing too well this year. Their offensive line is great, but I think it's going to be a bad filling out year for the Houston Texans, and they will be finishing at 6-11. But D'Amico Ryans and C.J. Stroud are definitely the future for Houston in the upcoming years, and they'll hopefully turn it around. All right, and then finishing fourth in the AFC South, I have the Indianapolis Colts, who will be finishing at a record of 4-13. And like I've said in my previous podcast, the Indianapolis Colts are just not a good team. They also now have a new uh, rookie quarterback who they just drafted in Anthony Richardson this year, who I think is going to be a star in the next couple of years, and who I could see being the best quarterback to come out of this draft. But right now, they're a horrible team. Obviously, they got the drama with their superstar running back and Jonathan Taylor. Who knows if he even still wants to play for the team? Their best wide receiver is Michael Pittman. He's a star. And then their second best wide receiver is Isaiah McKenzie. So that's not really saying much. They don't really have great tight ends. The offensive line, they have Quentin Nelson, but other than that, they've kind of had a bad offensive line for the last couple of years, especially with Andrew Luck. So this is just not really a great team. The defense is all right. I just don't really see too much bright spots in the defense. They lost a lot over the offseason. So sorry, Indianapolis Colts fans, but you guys are finishing at 4-13 and last place in the AFC South this year. But the future is bright for new quarterback Anthony Richardson for sure. All right, now we're going to move on to our last AFC division, where we are going to finish off with the AFC North. And the AFC North in first place, I have the Cincinnati Bengals taking first place at a finishing record of 13-4. The Bengals are Bengals, man. It's Joe Burrow's town. It's Joe Burrow's team. They're gunning for a Super Bowl, and this might be the last year that they really can, go for a Super Bowl and win a Super Bowl, as T Higgins and Jamar Chase are now coming up on their rookie deals next year. And even the owner said and the GM said that they probably won't be able to keep both. I could see T Higgins leaving over Jamar Chase, of course. But the Bengals are there. They're in their prime. They're there to go win a Super Bowl. They just got to get past Buffalo and Kansas City, who has been detrimental to them for the last couple of years. And then obviously lost in the Super Bowl 2 years ago to the Los Angeles Rams. But Joe Burrow is him, man, and they're going to have one of the best records in not only in the NFL but in the AFC. And I have them finishing at a record of 13-4. The only thing that does worry me about the Cincinnati Bengals this year is their safety position. They did lose their two top safeties in Von Bell and J.C. Bates in free agency this year. So they have a young back core in Daxton Hill and Jordan Battle, who they just drafted out of the draft this year. But they do have some good corners in Chidobe Awuzie. They also have Mike Hilton. So, I mean, not great corners, but some veteran presence, of course. So you do worry about the defense a little bit, but I think the Bengals will make up for it. They did bring in offensive star tackle Orlando Brown from the Kansas City Chiefs to help block Joe Burrow. So I definitely think this is Joe Burrow's year, and definitely one of the best teams to come out of the AFC this year. And they will be finishing at a record of 13-4 in the AFC North. And then finishing in second place, I have the Baltimore Ravens. They will finish at a record of 11-6. And this one was kind of tough for me. I was kind of thinking where they finish at 10-7, 11-6, 12-5. So I just went with the middle. And I think the Baltimore Ravens are bound for a big year, but I'm also worried about the Ravens because they're always bound for big years, and then they end up flaming in the playoffs. But Lamar Jackson is a great quarterback. He's got some accuracy issues, but he is an elite runner. He can get the job done. He can hang as a quarterback in this league. One of the NFL superstars, of course. Them bringing in also wide receiver Odell Beckham this year. Hopefully he makes a big impact, as he hasn't played in about 2 years coming off an ACL injury. So we'll see what happens there. But they also have Mark Andrews on that offensive side. They have their offensive line, who's always great. They're getting back J.K. Dobbins this year. But the defense is supposed to also be stacked up pretty well. So they brought in a couple good pieces, including Jadeveon Clowney and Ronald Darby. So I like I like the Ravens. I think they're going to be a good team this year, but I have them finishing at 11-6 because I'm not sure if they're going to be elite or they're just going to be good. So, but they'll be finishing second in the AFC North. And then taking third place in the AFC North, I have the Cleveland Browns finishing at a record of 10-7. And this is Deshaun Watson's year to prove that he's the quarterback for the future of the Browns. You know how the Browns are. They always have these quarterbacks that never work out for the last 20, 25 years. And he is definitely looking like he is going to be their future star quarterback for him, as they did trade for him last season from the Houston Texans, giving him a huge $200 million contract. Obviously, they brought in some new weapons for him, acquiring wide receiver Elijah Moore from the New York Jets. Nick Chubb is back for him. They also have Amari Cooper on the offensive side. They also built up that defense and bringing in Zadarius Smith from the Minnesota Vikings, and just having a good defensive core in their backfield and their linebacker positions. So, and then they also brought in Shelby Harris, defensive tackle, who was a former Denver Bronco, who I love. So this team's going to be good. It's going to be one of the best years for the Browns. Hopefully, Browns fans can rejoice. But they're going 10-7. But they will be taking third place in the AFC North. And then lastly, I have the Pittsburgh Steelers taking fourth in the AFC North at a finishing record of 8-9. They are also a team that I think is good, but is going to be a 500 ball team. They're not elite. They're not going to push it over the edge. Kenny Pickett, their quarterback, is still a young guy. He still has a lot to learn, more experience, but he does have a bright future. I liked how he finished out the year last year, so that's kind of why I'm giving them a little bit of a higher record. Of course, they have Pat Freiermuth, their tight end. They brought in Allen Robinson from the LA Rams. Of course, they have Najee Harris at running back, so they have a good offense and a good offensive pieces around Kenny Pickett. And of course, the Pittsburgh way is defense. They brought in a lot of defensive guys. They built up their defense this offseason. One of their most notable acquisitions was future Hall of Famer quarterback Patrick Peterson, who they just brought in this year from the Minnesota Vikings. But I still think that the Steelers are going to be a 500 ball team. I just don't. I think they're in too tough of a division and too tough of an AFC in general. So I have them finishing at 8 and 9 in fourth place in the AFC North. All right, everybody. Now we are going to move on to the NFC, and we are going to start with the NFC East division. And for my first place team finishing first this year in the NFC East will be the Philadelphia Eagles, finishing at a record of 13 and 4. And yes, it is Fly Eagles Fly once more, as they will be one of the best teams in the NFL and one of the best teams in the NFC East once more, with the at the helm of quarterback in Jalen Hurts. He's going to lead this team to the playoffs once more and is going to be looking to revenge his Super Bowl loss from the past year. Of course, the Philadelphia Eagles brought in a lot of pieces this year, especially from Georgia University, drafting Jalen Carter and Kaylee Ringo out of Georgia University, while also having former Georgia Bulldogs on their team as well. So this Philadelphia Eagle team is pretty much the Georgia University's college team. They also traded for Lions running back DeAndre Swift during the draft, who they acquired, and he is now their new number one running back as well. They also have the pairing of A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith at the wide receivers position, with their tight end in Dallas Goedert. Of course, the offensive line is great, and Lane Johnson is one of their biggest names and biggest stars on that offensive line. Their defensive line got loaded up. Their whole defense pretty much got loaded up this year. So the Philadelphia Eagles are definitely looking to make another push at the Super Bowl this year. So I have them finishing at a 13-4 record and finishing in number one in the NFC East. And then finishing second in the NFC East, I have the New York Giants football team. They will be finishing at a record of 11-6. Daniel Jones is proven to be that he is the guy for the New York Giants. Of course, they gave him a contract extension this year. They brought back Saquon Barkley on the franchise deal, so they'll be looking to give him some future money as well. But they're going to be a good team. I don't think they're going to be total elite, but they'll be a good enough team to make the playoffs. Of course, they have Sterling Shepard that they are getting back on the wide receiver position. They brought in Darren Waller, who I mentioned earlier, that they traded for from the Las Vegas Raiders, one of the top linebacker or top tight ends in the league, of course. And then their defense is great. They built up a couple of nice defensive pieces. They also have, of course, they have Kayvon Thibodeau on the linebacker position. So yeah, I'm liking the Giants this year, but I think they'll finish second place at 11-6 in the NFC East. And then finishing third in the NFC East will be the Dallas Cowboys, and they will be finishing at a record of 10-7. And this just seems like a right record for the Dallas Cowboys. Dak Prescott's a good quarterback, but he has his faults where he throws his picks. They have the new running back in Tony Pollard. As I mentioned earlier, they lost Ezekiel Elliott. But they also have wide receiver CeeDee Lamb. They brought in Brandon Cooks from the Houston Texans this year. So Dak's got some weapons around him. It's just that defense I always worry about. That defense is always iffy. That defense blows games for him. And then, like I said, Dak's interception problems could happen this year, but I think the Cowboys will finish at a decent record at 10-7, but they will be finishing third in the NFC East. And then finishing last in the NFC East will be the Washington Commanders. They will be finishing at a record of 4-13. And this is going to be one of the worst teams in the league this year, as they have their new quarterback, Sam Howell, who will officially be the starter for this year. He will be getting his full first NFL season in a starting position. So he's pretty much a rookie quarterback. I don't really like the pieces that they have. Obviously, Washington Commanders organization has kind of been a mess over the last couple of years with ownership. Um, and just their stadium isn't good. People always get hurt there. Their stadium is falling apart. Just not a great organization to play for and just be around. Really, their best weapons that they have is Terry McLaurin, wide receiver on the offense. He's really their best guy. They brought in Byron Pringle from the Bears. He's their second best guy, so that doesn't really say much. Their defensive side, of course, they have Chase Young on the defensive end, and then of course Deron Payne on the defensive tackle. So they're not really, not a team that I'm totally impressed with, especially with this new young rookie quarterback, pretty much in Sam Howell. So yes, they will be finishing last in the NFC East at a record of 4-13. All right, now we are going to move on to our next division, where we will be moving on to the NFC West, and this division contains the San Francisco Niners, the Seahawks, the Rams, and the Cardinals. So, for the first place for the NFC West, who I have it taking first in the NFC West, is the San Francisco 49ers at a record of 11-6, and Brock Purdy's first year as a full-time starter. I think, don't get me wrong, Brock Purdy, I think, is going to be a good quarterback, but I still think they're going to figure him out and see what he was doing last year and kind of figure out what he does and what his tendencies are. So I could see them dropping a couple of games, but man, this San Francisco 49er team is loaded this year, not only on the offensive side, but the defensive side as well. They have on the offensive side, they have wide receiver Debo Samuel and also Brandon Ayuk. They have, of course, their running back Christian McCaffrey. At tight end, they have George Kittle. So they got some pieces all over the place on that offense. And then on their defense, they have led by linebacker Fred Warner, superstar linebacker Fred Warner. They also have Tayshaun Gibson at the safety position. They have linebackers all over the place. They brought in Javon Hargrave from the Eagles this year, was a huge addition. Also brought in Clean Farrell from the Las Vegas Raiders as well. And of course, their biggest bright spot on their defense is Nick Bosa, defensive end Nick Bosa. So man, this Niners team is loaded this year. They're going to take a first place in the NFC West, but like I said, they're going 11-6 because I do think they're going to figure out Brock Purdy a little bit, and they're going to lose a couple of games, but ultimately they're going to take first in that division. All right, and then taking second in the NFC West, I have the Seattle Seahawks going 10-7 for a final record. And the reason I'm doing this is because it's Geno Smith, their quarterback. He had a great year last year, of course, led them to the playoffs, and of course, from the post era, Russell Wilson. Um, so he stepped in and played a huge role for the Seattle Seahawks. But like I said, same thing with Brock Purdy. Geno Smith is a veteran, but he's had some couple bad years over the last couple of years he's been in the league. He had one good year out of I don't even know, 10 now. So let's see if he can, double that up and win back-to-back years with winning records. So it all relies on Geno Smith this year for sure, but they brought in some key weapons for Geno this year, bringing in Jackson Smith and Jigba, wide receiver out of Ohio State that they drafted this year. Of course, they still have Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf on that side. They're getting Kenneth Walker back from injury this year, their running back. So they got some nice pieces in the tight end position. They got Noah Fant, who they got from the Russell Wilson trade with the Denver Broncos. And then they upgraded their defense a little bit this year, bringing in also Draymond Jones, defensive end from the Denver Broncos, signing him to a contract. Also bringing in Mario Addison, bringing back their star linebacker from the Los Angeles Rams, Bobby Wagner. Of course, Jamal Adams is coming back. He is going to be healthy, their star safety. So the Seahawks have a good team around him. It just all depends on Geno Smith this year. It really does. It's the Geno effect, whether they succeed or fail this year. All right, and then in third place, I have the Los Angeles Rams finishing at a record of 5-12. And this Los Angeles Rams team is horrible now. I mean, their only bright spots on their team is Cooper Kupp and Aaron Donald, and then, of course, Matthew Stafford, who led them to a Super Bowl title just 2 years ago. But they lost so much during the offseason. This is a completely brand new team. They totally built not only the offense but also the defense. They lost Allen Robinson. They lost Bobby Wagner. They lost all kinds of pieces. I mean, I could go on and on about what they lost, but this LA Rams team is going to be a bad team this year. Their next best wide receiver is Van Jefferson. Their running back is Cam Akers, who's a decent running back, don't get me wrong, but the offensive and defensive lines aren't going to be that good. It's a young, not only backfield, but a defense as a whole. Their safeties are really young. Their linebackers are really young. Their cornerbacks are really young. So it is a young defense that is going to get torched by some of these top teams in the NFC and in the league in general. So sorry, LA Ram fans, but you guys are finishing at 5-12 in third place this year. And then finishing last in the NFC West will be the Arizona Cardinals. They will be finishing at a record of 3-14. And yes, this is going to be the worst team in the league this year. Of course, like let me explain, their starting quarterback is going to be Colt McCoy, veteran Colt McCoy, uh, pretty much till either mid December or pretty much the whole year because, of course, Kyler Murray tore his ACL last December. So that takes about a year of recovery. So he's out the entire year. They lost a bunch of new pieces in the offseason with J.J. Watt retiring. They brought in a new head coach in Shane Steichen. Um, just I don't know. It's not a great team. I don't really see any bright spots. Buda Baker is their best player on the defense, but yeah, they're not going to have their star quarterback this year, and they're going to be running the offense with what's his face, Colt McCoy. Sorry, I hiccuped right there. And sorry, their new head coach isn't Shane Steichen; it's Jonathan Gannon. Sorry, I had to reiterate that real quick. But yeah, it's just not a good team. They lost a lot of pieces. Of course, they lost DeAndre Hopkins, who they got rid of. So their best wide receiver now is Marquise Brown. So this team will be the worst team in the NFL and have the worst record in the NFL this year at 3-14, and look to see the Arizona Cardinals having the number one overall pick in next year's draft. All right, now we're going to move on to our next NFC division, and we are going to move on to the NFC South. With this division contains the Falcons, Saints, Bucks, and Panthers. And this was the toughest division I had trying to figure out what records they would finish because there's some bad teams and there's teams that aren't going to be great, but they could make a huge impact. So this is definitely a tough one for me. But finishing first place in the NFC South this year will be the Atlanta Falcons, finishing at a record of 10-7. I've been riding the Atlanta Falcons for a long time over the last couple of podcasts. I like their moves in the offseason this year, bringing in a lot of key defensive pieces, including Calais Campbell, Bud Dupree, Clark Phillips, the cornerback from Utah, Jesse Bates from the Cincinnati Bengals. So they are building up that defense. Of course, they brought in Jeff Okudah from the Detroit Lions, who they traded for. So that defense is loaded up, and it's all about the offense pretty much with this team, as they are now going to be led with their new quarterback this year, quarterback Desmond Ridder out of the Cincinnati University, who they drafted in last year's draft. So he is a young quarterback, so that's why I do worry about this Atlanta Falcons team. But they do got great pieces on the offensive side as well with Drake London. So it's going to be an interesting year for the Atlanta Falcons. Of course, they also have Kyle Pitts on the offensive side. They also brought in Jonnu Smith from the Patriots. So that's two key tight ends that they brought in. Of course, the offensive line is great with Chris Lindstrom and Caleb McGarry. So I'm liking this Atlanta Falcons team, and I got them taking first place with a finishing record of 10-7. All right, and then finishing second in the NFC South will be the New Orleans Saints, finishing at a record of 9-8. And this was tough for me because I'm on the verge with the Derek Carr thing, and then also Alvin Kamara being suspended for the first three games. So that is going to definitely take a hit for the New Orleans Saints. But I'm Derek Carr. I think he's a good quarterback, but I don't think he's elite. I don't think he's great, but I think he'll fit just fine with the New Orleans Saints. Um, and then it also another team. It all relies on them staying healthy. Of course, you have Michael Thomas, who has had back-to-back-to-back years of not staying consistently healthy. So he needs to stay healthy because here's their superstar wide receiver, of course. And then also, like I said, Alvin Kamara will be suspended for the first 3 games, but he will be back. And then they also have their young wide receiver in Chris Olave as well. And then they brought back their former tight end in Jimmy Graham this year. And then also they have Taysom Hill, who is just a beast out of BYU, who has been a veteran for a long time now and just can pretty much play any position he wants to. But and then the defensive side of the ball, of course, they have Bradley Roby, Demario Davis, and then all kinds of other pieces. So it really all depends on Derek Carr, I believe, this year. Also, they have Marshawn Lattimore. But it really depends on Derek Carr this year. But I still think they're going to finish just above 500, and they're going to go 9-8 and second place in the NFC South. All right, and then for the third spot in the NFC South, finishing third place is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They will be finishing at a record of 7-10. And the reason I put 7-10 is I believe in Baker. I wouldn't say I'm a Baker Mayfield fan, but I think Baker gets treated. I think he gets hated on a little bit too much. I mean, don't get me wrong; he's not a superstar quarterback, but he's a decent quarterback. I think he's a decent quarterback. He led the Browns to a playoff appearance just a couple of years ago and whooped the Steelers' ass in the playoffs. Um, of course, got traded to the Panthers and he kind of didn't do too well there, but he got traded to, I mean, he got cut from the Panthers, signed with the Rams at the end of the last year, and led the Rams on a tear. Um, Looked really good as a professional starting quarterback, looked like the old Baker Mayfield, the old college Baker Mayfield. So obviously we are in the post Tom Brady era in Tampa Bay now, as Tom Brady just retired this season. And they still have a lot of their team around them. That defense is still great. They still have Levante David and Devin White in the middle linebacker positions. They have Vita Vea in the middle. They have Joe Tyrone Shainka on the defensive end side. Of course, their wide receivers and Mike Evans. So I like the Buccaneers. They have their running back Rashad White. He is a young and upcoming running back. So it all depends on Baker Mayfield, but I also think they're not going to be really that great this year. I still think it'll be kind of a bad team. So I gave them a fair record of 7-10. Obviously, Todd Bowles is their head coach, and I don't think he's a head coach. He just doesn't have the look and the feel of a head coach. I mean, I know he's had the experience, but they're just missing pieces. And the post Tom Brady era goes into what this record is for the Tampa Bay Bucks for me. All right, and then taking last place in fourth place in the NFC South this year will be the Carolina Panthers, and they will be finishing at a record of 5-12. And I'm sorry, but I'm not really on the Bryce Young train. Um, I mean, you can't judge a guy on his first year. He's a rookie, of course. They drafted him with the number one overall pick in this year's draft. So he is definitely the future of the Carolina Panthers. But man, the size and the weight scares me a little bit. And I've been watching preseason games. He's been getting thrown around. Um, Looks like a rookie quarterback, just makes bad decisions here and there. So I'm sorry, but the Carolina Panthers just aren't going to do that great this year. I understand they brought in some key weapons this year to help Bryce Young and Miles Sanders and their running back. They also brought in veteran wide receiver Adam Thielen from the Minnesota Vikings, also bringing in tight end Hayden Hurst from the Cincinnati Bengals. And then they also did bring in some key defensive pieces, bringing in Deion Jones from the Cleveland Browns, the linebacker, and then another linebacker, Justin Houston, who is a veteran who has had a great career. He'll be a future Hall of Famer. But the defense is the only thing that excites me really about this Carolina Panthers team. And I think you're really going to see Bryce Young be a rookie quarterback this year and make rookie mistakes. And they're just not going to finish with a good record. They're finishing at 5-12 in last place in the NFC South. All right, now we are going to move on to our last division in the NFC, and we are going to finish it out with the NFC North. And this division contains the Detroit Lions, Minnesota Vikings, Chicago Bears, and the Green Bay Packers. So, finishing first in the division in the NFC North, I have the Detroit Lions finishing in first place at a record of 10-7. And this is the year for the Lions to break out. This is Jared Goff's year to prove that he is a great quarterback in this league. This is a year for Dan Campbell to prove he is a head coach in this league. They barely missed the playoffs last year, and I really like what they did in the offseason, making some key moves. So this is definitely a big year for the Detroit Lions. Of course, they brought in David Montgomery from the Chicago Bears, new running back. They also drafted Jahmyr Gibbs out of the draft this year. They also brought back their former wide receiver in Marvin Jones. They're getting back their other wide receivers in Jamison Williams and Amon Ross St. Brown, excuse me. And I'm liking this team on offense. I think they have a great team. I think they have a great team on defense. The only thing that worries me, like I said, is a young defense. They still have Aiden Hutchinson, who's really young. Their linebackers are really young. But I think this is going to be a great team overall. They did bring in one of my favorite players, one of my favorite safeties in the league that I was hoping the Denver Broncos would get, but they brought in C.J. Gardner-Johnson from the Philadelphia Eagles. He is a great veteran safety, so I'm really liking this Detroit Lions team. So I have them finishing first place at 10-7 in the NFC North. All right, and then finishing second place in the NFC North will be the Minnesota Vikings. I have them finishing at a record of 7-10. And the reason for this is the Minnesota Vikings lost a lot of pieces this year. I know they had a great year last year, finishing first place in the NFC North and then ultimately losing in the playoffs. But I think Kirk Cousins is their quarterback. I think Kirk Cousins will do just fine. They have a great head coach in Kevin O'Connell, but they lost a lot of pieces. They lost Dalvin Cook, their star running back. They lost Eric Kendricks. They lost Adam Thielen. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. They lost a lot of pieces this year, and they're really their only bright spots on that offense are Justin Jefferson, who is the best wide receiver in the league, in my opinion. And then also they have tight end TJ Hawkinson, who is a great tight end, who they acquired from the Detroit Lions just a couple of years ago. Um, but yeah, this is going to be a brand new team that I think won't gel too well. I mean, they'll win a couple of games, but their losses will show in their ability to win games. So we'll see what happens with the Minnesota Vikings, but I got them finishing second place at a 7-10 record. And then in third place, I have the Chicago Bears finishing at a record of 6-11. And I'm sorry, this is another quarterback that I'm just not sold on, and it's Justin Fields. I just don't think he's an elite quarterback. I think he's could be a backup or starter in this league. A decent starter, but everybody's making him out to be this elite guy. And I think it's going to be another bad year for the Chicago Bears. I mean, don't get me wrong. I understand they built it up a little bit. They brought in star wide receiver from the Carolina Panthers, DJ Moore, to help out him. But their best tight end is Cole Kmet. They brought in Robert Tonyan. They built up the offensive line a little bit, but not too much to really help out Justin Fields. They lost their best running back in David Montgomery, who I just mentioned earlier. They built up the defensive side. I think the defensive side is better than the offensive side. I mean, they have Eddie Jackson, Jaquan Brisker. They brought in Tremaine Edmonds from the Buffalo Bills, who is a star linebacker for Buffalo, and now he's with Chicago. But just not really too much impressing me. They brought in also Yannick Ngakoue uh, from the Indianapolis Colts this offseason, so he's going to be a key piece off that end. He's a great player, great defensive end. But I just think it's going to be another bad year for the Chicago Bears because I think Justin Fields is a little overhyped, and I still think he's still too young to carry this team to the playoffs. All right, and then moving on to the last team who is going to take last place in the NFC North. I have the Green Bay Packers. They are going to finish out at a record of 5-12. And this team is a really bad team as well. They are moving on from the post Aaron Rodgers era. Of course, Aaron Rodgers signed or got traded to the Jets this past offseason. And now their new starting quarterback is Jordan Love, who they drafted out of Utah State just a couple of years ago. Don't get me wrong. I'm not sure how just Jordan Love's going to do with his NFL career, but it's his first year being a full-time starter. And, he's pretty much a rookie full-time starter. So, teams are going to obliterate him and figure him out. They lost a lot of pieces as well. Pretty much all of the Green Bay Packer players followed Aaron Rodgers to the New York Jets. They lost Randall Cobb. They lost Mercedes Lewis. They lost Alan Lazard. So their best wide receivers like Christian Watson. They do have Aaron Jones at running back, who is a great running back, but he's probably the best player on that offense. Their defense beat is beaten down. Their best player is Jair Alexander, cornerback. He's their superstar quarterback. But they lost Adrian Amos to the New York Jets as well. They're young linebackers. They drafted Luke Van Ness in the draft this year, but it's just a young team. That's the reason why I have the Packers only going 5-12 this year, because it's the post Aaron Rodgers era with a young quarterback and a young team all around. So it's not going to be a great year for Green Bay Packer fans. All right, now that I have come up with my NFL schedule predictions this year, I am going to name my 14 playoff teams who I believe, based off my record predictions, will make the playoffs this year. And for the AFC playoff teams, I have the Denver Broncos, the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Baltimore Ravens, the Kansas City Chiefs, the New York Jets, the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Buffalo Bills being the 7 teams that will make the playoffs in the AFC. And then in the NFC, my playoff teams will be the New York Giants, the Detroit Lions, the Dallas Cowboys, the Atlanta Falcons, the Seattle Seahawks, the San Francisco 49ers, and the Philadelphia Eagles being the 7 teams that come from the NFC. So let me know in the comments down below whether you agree with me on my record predictions, whether you agree if your team will do what I believe they said, or do you think they'll do better, or maybe even worse, so to say. But let me know down in the comments what you guys think your favorite team's record will be by the end of the year. All right, now we are ending this podcast. Before we end this podcast, I want to do what I do with every single one of my podcasts, and we are going to do the fun fact of the day. And today's fun fact of the day, since we did an NFL record prediction episode, we are going to do an NFL fun fact for today. So the fun fact for August 21st, 2023 is the Super Bowl wasn't originally called the Super Bowl. It was originally called the AFL and the NFL championship games. But that all changed when Kansas City Chiefs owner Lamar Hunt was watching his son Clark Hunt play with a Super Ball in the driveway of their home, and it kind of came to fruition, Super Bowl. So I'm going to name it the Super Bowl. And the Super Bowl has turned out to be one of the biggest, if not the biggest, sporting events in all of the history of sports in all of the world. So that's how the Super Bowl came to fruition. It came off a Super Bowl and is now called the Super Bowl. So thank you guys for sticking around for this episode. Like I said before, let me know if you agree with me in the comments, what you think your favorite team will finish this year, record-wise. And then also, if you are enjoying the Scarb Show podcast, please like and follow my podcast. Go follow my Instagram account at the Scarb Show podcast. And thank you guys for sticking around and listening and always being the support every week. And I appreciate all the listens. So thank you guys again, and we will see you guys next week.